All right, good morning. We're going to begin the program now. Please continue to serve yourselves, but please turn cell phones onto silent mode. My name is Ben Dupuy. I'm a member of the BGR Board of Directors and chair of the Breakfast Briefing Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to BGR's first breakfast briefing of 2023 at First Horizon Bank. I want to extend our gratitude to WWNO New Orleans Public Radio, which will rebroadcast this event on Thursday, March 30th at 9 p.m. We hope you'll take advantage of the question and answer portion of today's program. We provided instructions for submitting questions using the QR code to access the online Q&A form. The QR, this just went out. I'll go without a mic. There, it's back. Let's see. The QR code will be up on the screen during the Q&A portion, and you also have been given paper instructions. However, if you prefer to write your question, please hand it to a BGR staff member and include your name if you want to be identified. There will also be a QR code you can access to complete an online survey following the program. Again, we will show that code on the screen, or you may refer to your instructions. The best way to stay on top of all BGR events and research is to become a member. BGR is a private, nonprofit, independent research organization dedicated to informed policymaking and the effective use of public resources for the improvement of government in the New Orleans metropolitan area. We regularly engage with our members about our public policy work. BGR values this dialogue, and we appreciate our members' support in amplifying BGR's good government recommendations. If you're not currently a member, visit bgr.org and consider joining the ranks of empowered citizens working to improve local government. We also encourage you to follow BGR on social media. And now to introduce our topic this morning is Becky Mowbray, BGR's President and CEO.
All right. Thank you, Ben. I'd like to recognize First Horizon Bank for its generous sponsorship of the BGR Breakfast Briefing Series again this year. Your support allows BGR to make these events free to the public. It is wonderful to see everyone today. Thank you for coming this morning. For those who may not know, my name is Becky Mowbray, and I have served as BGR's President and CEO since January of 2022. BGR's research reports identify solutions to some of the most complex and significant challenges facing local government in Jefferson, Orleans, and St. Tammany parishes. In the coming months, we will be releasing research reports about an April 29th tax proposition to fund the New Orleans jail, the structure of the Sewerage and Water Board, and property taxes in our region. Breakfast briefings further BGR's mission by allowing citizens to hear directly from officials and experts on public policy issues vital to the greater New Orleans area. This is our first breakfast briefing of the year, and we will have 3 others. If you are not able to attend a breakfast briefing, please visit bgr.org to watch video replays of our events. This July will mark the 5th anniversary of the unification of New Orleans' post-Katrina school system under NOLA Public Schools, the district governed by the city's locally elected school board. Less than 2 years after NOLA Public Schools assumed responsibility for managing the almost all-charter system, the COVID-19 pandemic upended K-12 education around the globe, testing the district's strength in ways never anticipated. Today, the district continues to address challenges resulting from the pandemic's tolls on students' academic progress and emotional well-being. At the same time, it must make critical decisions to maximize schools' available resources as enrollment shrinks. And leading this work is NOLA Public Schools Superintendent and our speaker today, Dr. Avis Williams. Dr. Williams was selected to serve as superintendent of NOLA Public Schools in March of 2022 and is the first woman to be permanently appointed in this role. Previously, she served as superintendent of historic Selma City Schools in Selma, Alabama. There, she improved academic performance and graduation rates while she advocated for equity by prioritizing mental health and restorative justice. Teaching was always her dream, and she realized it with a considerable amount of hard work and passion. Dr. Williams joined the Army after high school and then put herself through college while owning her own business. She earned her undergraduate degree from Athens State University, her master's degrees from Alabama A&M and Jacksonville State Universities, and her education specialist degree and doctorate from the University of Alabama. Whew. She highlights her core values of equity, excellence, and joy, as well as her ability to drive innovation while improving organizational culture and climate as the hallmarks of her success. At the conclusion of Dr. Williams' presentation, I will be moderating a Q&A session. I'm sure there will be many questions after her thought-provoking presentation. As Ben mentioned, there is a QR code that will be shown on the screen, and you can access the online Q&A form using that code. Or you can use the piece of paper that's on your seat and handwrite your question and give it to a BGR staff member. We all have the green tags on our name tags. Finally, I'd like to say the views expressed in this program are those of our speaker. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Avis Williams.
Well, good morning. I'm so happy to be here. I wore my fancy shoes for you. And so for those of you who don't know me, I have this thing. It's called a sense of humor. And so if I say something that you think is supposed to be funny, I need you to laugh, all right? All right, and I'm a teacher, so I'm going to hold you accountable for that. I'm super excited to be here to share with you just really a glimpse of what's happening with NOLA Public Schools. And so thank you all for being here, and thank you to BGR for the invitation on behalf of all of NOLA Public Schools and the Orleans Parish School Board. I see we have Mr. Marshall and Ms. Baldwin here. Are any of my other board members here? Well, thank you both for being here. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through a little bit of what's happening with NOLA Public Schools. Now, I always like to start a meeting off with something positive. I call it What's Good. And so for my What's Good this morning, I'm just going to share a little bit of the work that's already happened. Many of you may know that I did start off with an ABC tour. And ABC is Dr. Avis's Beignets in Conversation. And this was my opportunity to get out and to build relationships, to learn more about the challenges, but also the celebrations that we have within our school district. And one of the things that I said over and over again during those meetings is that it's not all gloom and doom. We have so much to be excited about and proud of, even as we're unpacking the challenges. And so as part of that, we did about 30 ABC tour meetings and met with hundreds of people and got a lot of insights in terms of where we need to direct our energy. As part of that, the outcome was looking at solution circles. So in other words, as we look at the challenges, how are we going to resolve them? And so we've had two solution circles thus far. The first one was on enrollment, because one thing that I noticed is that it was very difficult to have a conversation about NOLA Public Schools without talking about One App or NCAP or the enrollment system, right? And so we wanted to unpack, what are the challenges that families face? And the solution circle was very helpful to give us some intel. Many of the suggestions that were made, we've already started to implement. The second solution circle is happening now, and it's around school quality. And so when we think about our schools and wonder, what are families looking for? What do you consider a quality school? And so this is a space where families and parents can lean in with us and talk to us about what it means to have a quality school. And then progress with district optimization. So we will open the 23-24 school year this fall with fewer schools, fewer networks. And this is because we have a declining enrollment. And I know I'm not telling you guys anything that you don't already know, because the population of our city is decreasing, and as a result, we have fewer students year over year. And so we will open the school year up with about 400 fewer seats online than what we had the previous year, and that's progress in terms of district optimization. Also really leaning into making sure that those relationships are being built with school leaders, formed a transition team, and that transition team has been instrumental in helping us reimagine the strategic plan. Also formed student, teacher, and family advisories, and those are groups that meet quarterly with me just to give me some insights of what their experiences are. So for the students, what is the student experience? What are some things that you're loving about your school, and what are some areas that you would like to see something different? And it's always fun to hear this from the lens and through the eyes of our young people, because they tell the truth and they don't really care about our feelings sometimes when they're doing that, but it's extremely insightful, and especially when they're bragging about the great things happening at their schools, and then another young person will say, well, I want that at my school, which is a good reason for us to share and collaborate so that our young people can even see what's happening across the district. Also working with our local and state legislators as part of that, building those relationships so that we can work collaboratively to ensure that we're doing the best work we can for our babies. Leading with equity, excellence, and joy. And as Becky mentioned, those are my core values. I think of equity in terms of removing barriers as well as providing access. Excellence, just doing the best job we can. And for me, joy is about celebrating our small wins and knowing that there are better days ahead, especially if we're able to work together. So I want to talk briefly about our district priorities. That first one, reimagining the strategic plan, think about that as the big umbrella of everything that I'm going to talk to you about today. So as we consider a roadmap to where we're going, the strategic plan will ultimately be the guide that will determine our steps. Also developing an accountability framework where we're considering the needs of the whole child, collaborating with other agencies as we address some of the challenges, not just within our schools, but within our community at large. And that's where we're looking at mental health and even crime and truancy. And then, of course, improving overall quality and the quality of our portfolio. So I'm going to talk about all of these, but really lean into the areas that we're considering as we reimagine our strategic plan. So as a strategic planner, I do consider this the roadmap. You know, oftentimes with school districts, we develop what we call a POTS, which is a plan on the shelf. And it can look great, it can have all the right answers and all the right pieces, but guess what? If we don't implement it, then we might as well not even have it. It's just sitting on the shelf. And that's not what we're looking at. These are the 4 areas that we will be leaning into. And when I say that, meaning that as we consider what our needs are, this is a draft. So everything that I'm sharing with you in terms of the strategic plan is still open for discussion, open for input and feedback from the community. But we're going to consider communication, school quality, community partnerships, as well as operational infrastructure. And so when we think about communication, this is internal, external, and it includes one-way communication where it might be us sharing information, but it's also that two-way dialogue where we're giving opportunities for the community, for our school leaders, for our families, and even our scholars, as I mentioned before, to give insights in terms of how they see the work that we're doing. So this includes transparency as well as clarity. You know, one of my Avisisms is always to be overly clear as much as possible. And we know that sometimes we get caught up into sending emails, and sometimes that's not overly clear. We have to have conversations with one another. Also, collaboration, you know, working together. Teamwork is key to us making sure that we're resolving our problems and solving our challenges together. Language inclusion and differentiation. And this is an area of growth for us. You know, we have a growing Hispanic population and many other languages within our community. And when I think about the language inclusion piece, it's a matter of making sure that everyone has an equal voice. And we do that by making sure we're eliminating those language barriers. And then, of course, the student voice. This is one of my favorite parts. I mentioned before Student Advisory Council. Also, every time I visit schools, I have some very interesting conversations with our young people. And a lot of it is just really about their school experience, just hearing it from their lens on how we're doing, what's working well for you, and what are some areas that you would like to do more or something different. And again, our young people have so much to offer and so much insights as it relates to their experience. And the core messages here are being clear, consistent, and transparent, and centering the voices of students, families, educators, as well as all community stakeholders. School quality. Now, I mentioned that we have a solution circle that's really digging into this issue, and they've met several times, and we'll be wrapping this up at the end of this month. And essentially, it's asking parents, how do you define quality schools? You know, what is it that you're looking for that makes you choose a certain school and determine that school to be quality? And thus far, what we've discovered is it's not about letter grades. It's not just about test scores. You know, families are concerned about the offerings that schools make in terms of academics, but they're also concerned about the supports and resources. You know, are there counselors and social workers and mental health professionals available? Are there extracurricular activities that my child might be interested in? And so I'm really excited to see the final outcome of that solution circle, because I do think it's important as we consider school quality that we're not the ones that determines that. You know, we have to rely on our stakeholders, which of course definitely includes our families. We're also working on a portfolio strategy, and this is where we're looking at a 5-year portfolio plan. And I like to look at it as determining what the next iteration of NOLA Public Schools looks like. As Becky mentioned, that we've gone through reunification or unification, and what's next, right? And so the 5-year portfolio plan will be a guide to share, to determine that information, and I'll share a little bit more about that in a bit. And then we also have our Charter School Accountability Framework, or the CSAF. You know, we're educators, so everything has to be an acronym. So the CSAF is the guide that we use to determine how our schools are doing. You know, as authorizers, that's one of the biggest roles that we have, is to look at accountability. And we're doing that this year and reimagining that as well, and looking at it where we're prioritizing growth and making sure that we're not only looking at the proficiency level of our scholars, but how much they're growing. And in a high poverty district and community such as ours, it's very important that we lean in not only on the proficiency pieces, but also the growth. And then supporting early learners and literacy. And that's a picture when we had a press conference earlier this year, where we're adding 5,000 more seats for pre-K, which we're super excited about, and excited about making sure we're providing access for as many families as possible for those seats. The core message here is providing a quality school environment that prioritizes the needs of the whole child. And that literacy piece is something that you're going to hear a lot about as we move forward. You may know that the state does have some very specific requirements around the science of reading, and that our teachers, our early elementary teachers, are getting training on the science of reading so that they can make sure that they're able to support readers as they learn those important literacy skills in elementary school. Next is community partners, and this is where we're looking at how we're working together as a community. And when I think about the challenges that we have in our community, they cannot be resolved by any single organization. And so as we lean into these issues, we're looking at mental health and trauma. And I do serve on several different groups where we're actually looking at various data points. We're looking at what crime, the impact that crime is having in terms of mental health. We're looking at access. We're looking at Medicaid expansion and what it looks like for our families to be able to truly engage with supports for mental health. And part of that is also looking at the stigma that's often attached to mental health, especially within a lot of our Black and brown families. You know, how do we take that stigma away so people realize that if you're not well mentally, then you need to get the same type of support that you would get if you were not well physically? School attendance and truancy, and you may have heard a lot about this over the last year. We have several working groups that have been involved in really digging deep on school attendance. Our campaign for the year has been Attend Today, achieve tomorrow. And we're really just looking at prioritizing, making sure that kids have good attendance. You know, it's not about being perfect, it's about being present and being present each and every day. Safety and community violence. As we consider the gun violence that's been happening in our community, as educators, we can't help but notice and be really intentional about prioritizing the impact that this has on our young people. You know, when we think about children experiencing trauma directly or indirectly, that shows up in the classroom. It shows up in the classroom each and every day. And our teachers, our staff, our school counselors are prepared to address it, and we need support from the community to make sure we're doing a great job with it, and especially providing those wraparound services that might be necessary for the entire family and not just our students. Family and community engagement, and again, I mentioned the Family Advisory Council will be part of that, but then also just making sure that families understand how they give us feedback and how to weigh in as it relates to the work that we're doing. Advancing equity, and I mentioned before, removing barriers and providing access. The core messages here are that we're collaborating with diverse stakeholders to drive the best outcomes for students, family, and the community at large. And then finally, with a strategic plan, operational infrastructure. This is where we're looking at our facilities. You know, we just recently had our surplus properties meetings, and thank you to all of those who showed up for those and gave your input and feedback. Because this is a great opportunity, again, to collaborate and learn more about how the community sees our facilities and what we could do in terms of our vacant facilities. You know, making sure that we're not looking at blighted properties throughout the community, but rather having these spaces that can help contribute positively to the community. And I'll give you an example of some of what we're working on now is just really looking at community usage. I've had several suggestions about child care centers in spaces where we may not have enough child care. I had a school leader bring up a point recently where we have some of our students, some of our young people have children. And some of them are challenged getting to school because they don't have child care. You know, and what would it look like for us to use some of our facility space to expand child care? We've even had people think about a lot of our hospitality workers. You know, what would it look like for us to really lean in and make sure that we're using our facilities in a way that can support our hospitality workers? And then even community use in terms of after-school programming. You know, when I talk to our young people, and I know you guys have probably heard this, and we ask about why do you think we see so much crime? A lot of our kids will say, because there's not enough to do. Now, I would argue there is enough to do. It may not be what you want to do, and you may not have access to be able to do it, right? Because we have lots of activities for our young people. But if it's not activities that are of interest to them, they're not going to do it. And if they can't get there, they're not going to do it. So what would it look like for our facilities to play a role in that? You know, to have high quality after-school programming. Maybe it's esports, you know, where they can actually do some gaming. And y'all know you can get a scholarship for esports, right? It's an NCAA sport. And we have a lot of young people who are into gaming and don't even realize that that's a sport. And so we certainly could do something like that in our facilities. Looking at our district level human resources is also a part of this piece, and just making sure that we're being good stewards in terms of how our organization is structured. Finance, funding, and the millage. We do have a millage renewal coming up this fall, so definitely look to hear more information about that. And that millage is to support our facilities and the preservation of our facilities. Leveraging data for continuous improvement, and this is from an organizational standpoint. You know, what does it look like for us to rate ourselves and determine where we are, but also to use some data to determine what are some areas in which we need to improve. And then long-range organizational planning. I mentioned before that we're doing a 5-year portfolio plan and looking at long-range, what are the needs of our community. When I think about this specific area, workforce development and quality of life definitely come to mind. So in other words, what is it that we need to do as an organization and as a school district that's going to pour into the community in a positive way to add to the quality of life within our community and to ensure that we're being supportive of our families, our stakeholders, our business community as we make decisions and move forward. And the core message here is driving the most healthy and sustainable conditions to ensure long-term viability. And so those are the 4 areas that we're looking at for the strategic plan. And so the other information I'm about to share with you, again, just think about this as the big umbrella. The strategic plan is the big umbrella. And these other areas fit in various spaces. But I'm lifting them up because they are a part of the core work that we're doing right now. And it's part of what I learned during the ABC tour meetings that were necessary and that the community expected of us. So the first one, the first is accountability. And I mentioned before that as authorizers for our charter schools, this is a biggie. So we want to make sure that we are having an accountability framework that, again, prioritizes growth, but also looks at poverty. I mentioned before, we're a very high poverty community. So what would it look like for our accountability to include a poverty index? Because we have some schools that have higher levels of poverty, which may lead to more challenges. The student experience, lifting up student voice. Our Portrait of a Graduate work is a great example of how we're allowing students and expecting students to weigh in. And then data, data, data. One of my Avisisms is, in God we trust, all others bring data. Thank you. Thank you for those of you who laughed appropriately on that, yes. All right, collaboration. And this is important for a lot of the challenges that we're facing. The mental health collaborative is a piece that I have specifically enjoyed leaning in, learning more not only about the data, but about solutions. Medicaid expansion, this is one of the access issues in terms of how our families are able to engage with mental health supports. Safety task force, and early childhood education. These are some areas where we have definitely collaborated and will continue to do so in a very deep way as we consider how we can work together to improve outcomes for all of our families. Portfolio planning. The 5-year portfolio plan will lean into these 4 areas: the quality, quantity, choice, and variety. And I'm really excited to look at that choice piece and the variety piece. When we think about variety, that's about diversity, the diversity of our programming, the innovation, the creativity. And one of the things that we'll prioritize is making sure that our schools are meeting the needs of our workforce. Because at the end of the day, we do want to make sure that our scholars are college and career ready. I don't subscribe to this notion that college is not for everybody. Of course it is. Every child, every scholar needs a career, and college is just one way to get there. So we want to make sure that we're preparing our scholars by having a variety of programming. And then, of course, having that stakeholder engagement, which you'll hear more about over the coming months as we dig into our portfolio planning. And in terms of what's next, I mentioned the Portrait of a Graduate, and this is going to be our North Star in terms of what we expect our scholars to be able to do and know when they graduate from high school. Care Fair and Care Ambassadors. CARE is our community access to resources and equity. And this is where we're leaning into not only mental health, but even quality of life, literacy, workforce development. Increased collaboration and access to wraparound services through the NOLA Public Schools Hub. And this is where we're looking at what would it look like for us to eliminate the runaround that families have to make, to have a one-stop shop where you've got your wraparound services, you've got mental health counseling, you've got support if you're looking for a job, if you're needing to apply for benefits. And so we're digging deep on that and partnering actually with Caddo Parish and Shreveport because they're doing something very similar to that. And then finally, teacher supports. I mentioned before that we've got the literacy guidelines and the science of reading. Science of reading is hard, y'all, and our teachers need all the support that they can get from all of us in terms of not only from a curricular standpoint, but even just that moral support and encouragement so that they know that we believe in them and that we're supporting them in the work that they have to do each and every day. Because too often we do put way too much on our teachers and have an expectation that they can work miracles, and it's not fair for us to do that and not support them. So teacher supports is something that you can definitely expect to hear more about as we move forward. Those are my babies, aren't they adorable? So this is what drives me. When I think about what keeps me up at night, it's about making sure that these babies have what they need to be successful, and making sure that we're doing all that we can to eliminate the barriers and provide access to true quality education for each and every one of our scholars. So with that being said, that's my presentation, and I'm excited to hear your questions. Thank you so very much.
Fantastic. You can stay right there.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. In keeping with BGR's tradition, we will now take questions for the audience. We've received a number of them through our QR code online. If anyone would like to submit a question on paper, we've got BGR staff members on the perimeter of the seats here, and feel free to hand your questions to them as well. Start with one that came in. So, Dr. Williams, what do you think are the driving reasons for teachers leaving the classroom in New Orleans public schools? And what can schools do to improve teacher retention, and what can the district do to help address this issue?
Right out the gate, huh? Yeah, that's a great question. And the thing about it, this is a national problem. The problem really is that we're not even getting enough people going into the teacher profession. And this is nationally. This is not just a New Orleans problem. You know, when we think about the why behind that, you know, a lot of times people think that it's about pay, and pay matters, because I do think teachers need to make more money. But the working conditions, the lack of respect, the overbearing amount of work and accountability that teachers are held to, I think are reasons why we don't see as many going into the profession. And I also think that I don't see an end in sight, unfortunately. Because as we talk to our colleges and universities, they're doing all they can to try to recruit, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to reinvent some of this thing called education, I believe, in order for us to attract and retain teachers. Now, one of the things that I've really started to pay close attention to is how we operate from an intergenerational standpoint. I'm Generation X, best generation ever, yeah, y'all know it. And for many years, my colleagues have been complaining about millennials. These doggone millennials, you know, you sound like your parents when you start doing that, right? But guess what, y'all, millennials are old now. We've got Gen Z now, right? So what does it look like to make sure we're prioritizing our workspaces for the generation of teachers that we're trying to attract, right? Because education is one of those fields that just hasn't changed enough. And I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not being more intentional about attracting and retaining the teachers that we have, the millennials, the Gen Z, and what comes after that. And as long as we continue to miss that boat, I don't see this problem getting better as quickly as we need it to. And one of the things that we're doing is partnering with our university. We do have a partnership now where we're working to get teachers certified. And this is a way of supporting teachers, right? Because if they can go through this cohort with other teachers, they're building a sense of community. And so we're looking at doing that more. And then we're also making sure that we're supporting our schools in terms of culture and climate, because those working conditions really do matter. But at the end of the day, I really think the big thing is that we're going to have to rethink how we do education in terms of attracting and retaining our young professionals. As far as here, cost of living, extremely difficult, and especially when you consider a new teacher who may be coming just out of college. It's very difficult to consider living in a place where the cost of living is as high as it is here, and then you add the crime to that, and where folks are wondering, am I safe here? And it's a double whammy when you're struggling financially and not feeling safe. So I do think those are two areas that the entire community will have to work together and lean in on for us to have an impact.
Terrific. We have lots of questions coming in. This is fabulous. Okay. Let's see. So what actions are the NOLA Public Schools taking to support the proposed Excel graduation pathway that expands graduation eligibility for recently arrived immigrant students who are English learners?
So that's a great question. So it just so happened last night at our board meeting, we had an update on our English learners and work that's being done. And it was sobering, because what we learned is that we're not doing enough for our English learners in terms of that language acquisition. And so we will be working with our team to see what additional resources are needed. I'm a big believer in looking at programs that are working elsewhere. And so one of the things that I'll encourage our team to do is to look at what's happening, not just within our state, but across the nation as it relates to supporting English learners. We do know that Spanish is the top language that our family members have when they're not when they're second. English as a second language, that's what it is, ESL, English as a second language. And so I am working with some of our partners to have a Hispanic town hall where we can learn more about the business community and the wraparound services that our Hispanic families need. We can't stop there because, again, that's not the only language that we're looking at in terms of our English learners, but it really is about just digging deep and looking at best practices and what's working in other communities. Because, again, this is another one of those pieces that's implications nationally and not just here in New Orleans.
Okay, terrific. I'm going to combine some questions that are coming in on similar subjects. What challenges do you see in letting our strongest schools grow and our weakest schools fail? Will you encourage mergers and closures? And what have NOLA Public Schools learned from school closures that have happened in the past?
Very good question. So one of the things that I looked at in terms of data points, and this is, I believe it was from, it wasn't the Cowan Institute. Y'all help me remember the research agency. That's my comms team. Who was it? ERA, yep, where they were looking at what happens when schools close and do students end up in a better quality school. And overwhelmingly, the answer was most of the time. And so, we can't necessarily say 100% of the time, but do they end up in a better quality school? And of course, this was looking at school closures that was based on academics. And so that's something that we'll continue to look at, just what the data say in terms of what happens when we close schools. In terms of high quality versus schools that are underperforming, that is part of what the 5-year portfolio plan is going to help us look at better. Look at what we mean by quality school, what we mean by choice when families are deciding on a school. One of the things that I often wonder is when we think about families that choose a school that's far from their home, are they doing that because they just inherently want to go to that school? Might be for legacy reasons, right? Or is it that they're passing by 4, 6, or 7 schools that they do not consider quality schools in order to get to that other school? So these are questions that we're asking ourselves and our family members as we dig into school quality. Because at the end of the day, part of what we should be doing within our charter schools is replicating those best practices. When we find something that's working well, how do we make sure that information is shared and replicated? And that's something that we certainly will embed in our 5-year portfolio plan. And as well as we consider the schools that are underperforming, what are we doing about our DNF schools? And that's something that will be addressed in the plan also. But one thing I know for sure is that we can't close our way to better quality schools. So this is not going to be a situation to where, we're closing. But what supports, resources, changes, different types of accountability do our DNF schools need in order to thrive? And those are the types of questions that we're asking as part of the portfolio plan. So right now, we really do have more questions than answers as it relates to that. But the one thing that I know for sure is we cannot close our way to better quality schools. And a second piece is that we've got to really start lifting up the practices that are working well and make sure that those are being replicated.
We have several questions about measuring school performance. What are the most important metrics to quantify and measure success over the next 3 years? What are the top 3 to 5 KPIs? Where are we today, and where do you want to get with those KPIs in the next few years to define success?
It's like 30 questions. It's a great question set. So first of all, I will say, as we look at our accountability framework, if you imagine a pie chart, right? Proficiency, academic proficiency is always going to be number one, because at the end of the day, we do need our scholars to graduate, reading on grade level or above, and ready to engage in the workforce, right? But we'll also look at growth, because as a high poverty community, we know that many of our scholars enter kindergarten already at a cognitive level that's 2 to 3 years below what would be expected for a kindergartner. And what can we do in terms of our early childhood programming when we're working with families with age 0 to 3 so that we're improving kindergarten readiness and having more families that are engaging in high quality child care before they enter kindergarten. So that's something that we can absolutely do. And I would say the other piece in terms of improving our schools is just really digging in to the culture and climate and the student experience. What is it that our students need to feel like they are thriving in school? And for me, we cannot do this without addressing trauma and mental health. And a lot of the challenges that we have go back to unaddressed trauma and the need for more mental health supports. And it's unfortunate that just as we have the teacher shortage, there's also a shortage of mental health professionals. And that's something that we're going to work closely with our partners to see how can we help support a pipeline for that. But it's again, a quandary, because it's not just a New Orleans problem, it's also a problem nationally. In terms of KPIs, that is something that we're looking at for our strategic plan. And we've got lots of them in terms of how we will measure success. But in terms of school quality, a lot of it will go back to those areas of really looking at academic achievement and looking at academic growth year over year, and even identifying our teachers who are consistently growing scholars. Who are our teachers that we can lift up as instructional coaches to help support other teachers. In a very similar way to what I said earlier, replicating those best practices, we can do that with our teachers as well as other programming within schools. So when we get to the strategic planning piece, as we unwrap and determine what our goals and strategies are, we'll dig much deeper into determining those KPIs as well. We already have a running list, but I don't think you can really name KPIs until you've also named your goals and your specific strategies.
We have several questions relating to the One App and the use of algorithms. I'm going to read you 2 of them. First is, what do you say to Black parents in search of a quality education for their child, but are barred from the select 4 to 5 schools that have proven success? The One App algorithm seems to only admit middle-class white students to those schools. And I'm going to read you a second one, too. If the One App lottery takes place through an algorithm, why are we waiting months between when we apply and select our list of schools and find out where our child has gotten a spot? It causes unnecessary stress, and the delay generally makes things difficult. Please explain and let us know when we will find out about placements for the main lottery as well as pre-K4. Thanks for the great work you're doing.
All right, great questions. And again, I mentioned earlier that I could not have ABC conversations without this coming up. So it's a very popular topic. In terms of Black students, first of all, when we think about One App and what it does allow families to select schools, and it does use an algorithm to determine where those placements will land. And some of our schools have selective admission, where you've got specific criteria. We have some schools that have a certain number of slots that are reserved for university. And then we also have the geographic piece, where you get priority if you live within a geographic range. I don't have a good, simple answer for that question. I do know that we've got schools, several schools, to where they don't look like our school community. When I say that, meaning that we have close to 90% of our students are black and brown, and yet we do have a number of schools that have approaching half of their students are white. I asked the same question, how is that possible? And as we go through the main round this time, that's one of the things that I'm gonna really lean into. This is my first cycle, right, of main round, of the next round, and so forth. And so those questions are good questions, because I wonder the exact same thing. You know, how can you have a school that's 48% white or 52% white in a school population, a school community that's almost 90% black and brown? That math ain't mathing for me either. So that's something that we'll be looking at during the selection process this year. In terms of the timeline, that's a good question, and I have to go back to my enrollment team to get more information about where we are with that. By the end of this, yeah, it'll be done by the end of this month. But what I think I'm hearing in that question is that's a long time. When you applied, possibly in December, right, and then you're waiting until the end of March. So yeah, I'll talk to our enrollment team to see about those timelines.
Several schools have been unionized. Does this hamper your ability to implement your strategic plan?
Not at all. So first of all, I meet monthly with the union president. Dave is my friend, and talk about the challenges that he sees and the great things that the teachers are doing. In fact, I'm working closely with him to plan some teacher supports and to really look at how we can help our teachers have a sense of community. So no, the union is definitely not a hindrance, and I do enjoy partnering with UTNO.
How will or how is the district advocating for more funding and expanded use of existing funding, either through board policy or through the legislature? So board funding, what are you doing about
just funding in general? Oh, okay. Yeah, so our legislative priorities do include looking at funding, and some of it for specific things, like more funding for mental health, more funding to make sure we're supporting looking at eradicating poverty, and more funding in terms of the percent that we receive to operate schools or to be the authorizer. Right now it's 2%, and we actually had a great conversation. If you get a chance, go look at our committee of the whole meeting from yesterday, because there really was a great conversation around funding and around even the Constitution and what it says about how schools should be funded. And so we do lean in with our legislators around how our funding is working for us and what our additional needs are. And as this legislative session opens, we will continue to work closely with our legislators on that. One of, again, our specific asks is that there is more funding allowed to support mental health. And I keep going back to that because I do really see that as one of our biggest challenges.
We'll stay on the funding topic for a moment. Where can private philanthropic dollars do the most good for our schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on the school, I would say. You know, if you're interested in supporting a school, our team can help you identify some needs if you don't have something specific in mind. But I would definitely say that a space that we already know would be looking at how we can support our teachers. You know, I'm a big believer, and one of my chiefs says this best, that there are two jobs in education. There are teachers and there are those who support teachers. And so if I were to just off the top of my head say where philanthropic dollars should be spent, I would say in supporting teachers. And, you know, go to the school of your choice and ask, hey, what can I do to help support your teachers? And let them tell you what the answer would be to that. Let them let you know what are some ways that teachers can feel valued, can be rewarded or celebrated, because we cannot do this work without our teachers. And, you know, when we can make them feel valued and supported, it really goes a long way in terms of the impact that they have in the classroom.
One other question on funding. Have NOLA Public Schools considered creating tax credits for investments in public education, as Arizona has done?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll relay that to my CFO. I'm not familiar with specifically what Arizona has done, so I can't really answer that question, but that's something to consider, and always believe in looking at national models. We're not in a box or a bubble here in terms of how we lead and how we make decisions, so I will check out what Arizona is doing, and we'll see.
Okay. Let's see, another one. Earlier you mentioned ensuring school programming matches local career opportunities. What is the district doing to expand career readiness and dual enrollment opportunities within NOLA Public Schools? Also, what is the district doing to ensure that all students have access to these opportunities across the district portfolio?
Yeah, great question. So a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to visit our new career center. It is amazing. And it is everything that you could ever hope for in terms of career and technical education. But it's one facility, and we know that we may have needs beyond what that facility can provide. And so we do have our Portrait of a Graduate, which is one piece where we're looking at, again, what students should be able to know or do as they graduate high school. But also looking at business partnerships, apprenticeships, internships. Our partnership with Youth Force NOLA has been amazing. Working with STEM NOLA to really prioritize STEM fields. But community partnerships are a great way for us to make sure that we're preparing our scholars to be workforce ready. And when I meet with our business leaders and our various workforce organizations, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about making sure that we are preparing the next workforce. And it's a heavy lift, but in looking at the Portrait of a Graduate, as we consider the various components of it, it's based on how our scholars can be prepared to engage in those high-wage, high-skilled jobs once they graduate high school or college. And so providing those opportunities is huge. And one thing I'm really excited about is I was recently contacted by a lieutenant colonel who's from New Orleans and wanted to start ROTC program. And we have several schools that are interested. And I bring that up because ROTC does fall under the umbrella of career and technical education. And so that's an additional piece that we look at adding to our high schools that are interested in that. But the main thing is just partnering and listening to our workforce development partners and looking at data. There are data trends that show what the outlook is on occupations and what skills scholars need in order to engage and to be successful in going towards those occupations.
We also have some questions about the structure of charter schools and district-run schools. So based on your first 9 months leading our all-charter district, what would you identify as the model's greatest strength? What is its biggest weakness or challenge? And are charter schools the forever solution for New Orleans?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest strength, I think, is the fact that our schools can have unique identities. And it goes back to what I said earlier, though, leaning into that variety to making sure those unique identities are supporting workforce needs. I would say the biggest challenge that we have is data. And I'll just use the attendance piece as an example. As we're trying to decide, did the work that we did in terms of these working groups and the enormous amount of time that our team and community supporters have spent looking at attendance and looking at truancy, did it work? Well, guess what? If we don't have the data, we don't know if it worked or not. And getting data is oftentimes a longer length of time than what it needs to be for us to make data-driven decisions. And so I would say that's probably the biggest barrier. In a traditional district at the central office level, you'd be able to just and pull up Power School or whatever student information system you're using and immediately have access to that data. And so I believe in making data-driven decisions. And when we're not able to get the data in a timely manner, it's impossible to do that. Are charters the forever answer? I don't know. Our 5-year portfolio plan will help drive decisions around that. But at this point, it's a little too early to say where we'll land as far as our next iteration. One thing that I know for sure is that as we look at school quality, we are going to look at ways to make sure that we're making improvements within our schools that need it. And again, those would be the persistently lower performing schools, any schools that have consistently been at that D or F level. You know, how do we improve those schools? So certainly leaning into that, and in terms of what's next, we'll have to wait and see, because that 5-year portfolio planning is going to involve a great deal of community engagement that will begin late spring through the fall. And my expectation is when we produce that report in the spring, around this time of next year, those answers will be a part of that plan.
New Orleans is a city with strong neighborhood bonds. The removal of school districts seems to have caused many issues: time wasted on buses, the cost of transportation, but most importantly, the accountability that comes with knowing your neighbors, having social connections and friends close by, and even school pride. Is there any plan to put more emphasis back on location and bring back more neighborhood schools?
So when we think about school quality, this is part of what came up in our solution circle. You know, we think about quality schools, do you look at it as a community school or not? So I'm really interested to see how our families that are participating in the solution circle weigh into that. In urban cities, community schools are difficult. And it's not a reason not to have them, but it does make it more challenging in urban cities to actually have what we consider true community schools, you know, where you could walk to school and that sort of thing. In a choice district, it does create a situation where you may not go, your child may not go to the same school as children within the neighborhood. So one of the things that we will lift up is how we define quality schools, and is that part of it? And as we consider that question, this again is a part of that 5-year portfolio plan. The quality and the choice, I think, go towards answering this question, because again, when you have choice to decide where you want to go to school, are you deciding to go to school at a place that's far away on purpose because you want to go there, or is it because you don't have a quality school within your community? So those are some of the questions that I look forward to getting some clarity on from our families.
How can business leaders, community members, and other interested New Orleanians support your work and our city, whether they are parents of public school children or not?
That's the best question ever. So yeah, that definitely reach out to us. We've got our communications team here, our chief communications officer, because the needs are always great. And you know, I think it varies from school to school, right? From community to community. And so if you're a part of the business community or organization, reach out to us, because we know there's a place that we can absolutely plug you in to support. And the work that needs to be done cannot be done in isolation. It's going to take collaboration and partnerships for us to truly make sure that our schools are giving our community what it deserves. And I am well aware of the fact that public education is a driver for economic development. So it would behoove all of us to make sure that we're pouring into the quality of our schools. And I know you all are going to do that, so thank you in advance.
One last question. We love your positivity and great attitude. What is your advice for encouraging more New Orleanians to share in your positivity and great attitude?
Thank you. So choose joy. You know, sometimes people think joy is soft and ooey gooey. Y'all, joy is hard. In the world that we live in, joy does not come without some intentionality. And so I would say that it's all about having an attitude of gratitude, because as much as you may want to lift up some things that are wrong and we could do better and what's wrong with this and that, what are you grateful for? What are you grateful for? I mean, that's one thing that I recognize each and every day. When I open my eyes, I'm grateful. When I'm able to speak and share our story, I'm grateful. When I have people asking how they can help, I'm grateful. And so I would say that would be the biggest thing, and it's an intentionality behind it. It does not come just automatically. So be grateful for all that you have and all that you're doing. And I know we're coming to an end, so I'll just end by saying I'm grateful for each and every one of you, and grateful for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all the time we have for questions. We tried to get in as many as we could. There were some terrific ones. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for speaking with us today. We really, really appreciate it. Thanks again to First Horizon Bank for its generous sponsorship of this breakfast briefing, and thank you to all of you for being with us this morning. Please remember to complete your online survey. We'd really like to find out more about your experience today. A recording of today's BGR breakfast briefing will be available on our website, bgr.org. It's also available through the QR code right there. And today's breakfast briefing will be rebroadcast on WWNO New Orleans Public Radio next Thursday, March 30th at 9 p.m. We hope that this event has been informative and that we will see you again at future BGR events. Please watch for a new round of research reports in the coming months and follow us on social media. Thank you again for starting your day with BGR and have a great one. Take care.